knowing all along they're in favor of it because it protects them from you and me. Which leads to government enforced monopolies, such as banking industry, energy. You got to buy, if you want to qualify for the tax benefit of some alternate energy thing, you got to buy it from an approved contractor or company. All these things tend to restrict innovation, which ultimately will lead to some very bad things. We also have to deal with people who are regulation surfers, which are some of these groups we talked about before, such as accountants, human resource specialists. What do those guys add to civilization? Regulatory compliance consultants. Hey, there's some new law, hire me to help you navigate it. Regulation or regulatory compliance vendors. There's a new meter you have to use. You have to test your water or something. I've got the meter that I can sell you to help you do that. Any licensed profession, like doctors, for example. Doctors would be shocked to think that they could be regulation servers or regulatory compliance servers. But they are. They're protected by essentially a monopoly founded in law. Now, if you had a choice, excuse me, in a free society of going to a licensed doctor who was behaving essentially like a union worker, or going to a practitioner who is not licensed, that was really good and everybody knew they were good at it, you would naturally want to go to the other one. That seems like a slippery slope kind of argument, because then you'd have every quack practicing medicine. No, you wouldn't, not after they killed enough of their patients. I mean, they would sort themselves out, and you would apply your judgment as to who to go to for care. You wouldn't just go to the one that has the thing on the wall, because he may be a quack too. It's just he's a licensed quack. And I don't mean that in a populist way either, because there's a lot of good doctors. But we know there's some that aren't. And we can't sort them out because we can't use our judgment. Licensed trades like plumbers, electricians, etc. I'm sure there's lots of electrical engineers out there who could wire a house better than a guy who has a license to do that. But he's not allowed to. Only the licensed guy can do it. He's in part of a protected monopoly class. And we can go on and on and on about these regulation surfers. So now we need to talk about the myth of sheeple. Now that we know who the enemies of liberty are and how you can identify them, who the friends of liberty are and how you can identify them, let's talk about this idea of sheeple. We run into the 100 people, we try to talk to them, try to teach them about liberty and things that they need to know, and oh, I don't want to listen to it. We call them sheeple. No, they're not sheeple. Most people are not misguided or ignorant. They enjoy their lives as is at your expense, and that's why they don't want to listen to you. Because you're rocking their boat. Law enforcement is only executing the implicit will of these people. Politicians who are savvy. You don't get to be a senator or a congressman without understanding your electorate. It just doesn't happen. It's a highly competitive environment. Politicians are savvy enough to play that market. When they put on this mock battle about health care reform, they're doing it because each of them is flicking their little political advocates, knowing that, hey, I'll garner more votes if I act like I'm struggling for my guys. It's just a game. Because they know what the populace wants, and what most of the people in this country want is to live their lives at your expense. The media carries stories which does exactly the same thing. It plays to that market. We hear conservatives say, well, newsprint is going out of business because nobody wants to hear the liberal stories. That's bull. Papers are going out of business because the medium itself is becoming obsolete. It's not the content. Because if it was the content, CNN would be gone tomorrow. But they're not. So it's not that the newspapers are going out of business because the message is bad, it's just the medium's dying. But in general, the media has this nonsense story of we have to go in and bus children away from their parents in Texas because we don't like their religion. Oh, I'm sorry, because they were abused. The media plays that story because it knows that's the message most people want to hear. How we're being the nice people and going in and breaking up families and hauling them off. And then when they make the mistake of putting the moms on TV and say, hey, aren't you glad we saved you? They're like, what are you talking about? You destroyed my family. And oh, those stories stop, because that's not what people want to hear. They don't want to hear the mom saying, yeah, I choose to worship God in a way that you don't agree with. I choose to raise my kids in a way you don't agree with. I choose to build a community of people that I want to live with, and I don't want to go out in your world and deal with you people. The electorate, the sheeple, they don't want to hear that. They're not sheep. And they are the source of the genie blink problem. If you were to genie blink all the bad guys away tomorrow, the electorate will find more bad guys to do exactly the same thing that they were doing last week. They're beneficiaries of the status quo. Regulation surfaces of all kinds, we've talked about them. Government employees, whether it's civil, law enforcement, or military, they all benefit from the status quo. Government contractors at all levels. If you were to go pick anyone at random, you can find, in many cases, some thread of money that leads back to a government contract. Even if you're running a restaurant in a military town, you're running a restaurant in a military town because there's government money there. These people count on government money. Retirees, of course, they want things to stay the way they are because they don't want to challenge their check. The entitled classes, those are usually bear the brunt of, oh, we're spending too much money, but really, when it comes down to it, they're pocket change compared to what we spend in these other categories. Holders of government bonds. In your packets, you had an article called Bonds, What Bonds? I challenge every one of you to read that article and understand it. People who hold government bonds are no different than slave traders because they said, I want to make money by owning something that gives me the right to send thugs to beat up you and your children to get money to pay them back. That's what a government bond means. Municipal, savings bonds, treasury, whatever it is, are funds which invest in those, are slave-holding documents. And I challenge each of you to get rid of those things. They're not investments. They're going to destroy our society. And one day, owning one of those things may be a very, very bad thing. But people who hold these things, of course, they're interested in the status quo. The guys you hear on conservative radio, well, I'm watching my portfolio, and I got some of them in bonds. Yeah, this guy who says he believes in liberty wants to have something in his possession that says, go beat up some guy and take his money and give it to me. Churches and civic organizations also are beneficiaries of the status quo because in many cases they're tax exempt. Of course they don't want to rock the boat. For a period in Atlanta, we were out looking for an office to buy, and just about everywhere we turned, everything was either owned by churches or they were placing purchase contracts on it. Because they had plenty of money and it's tax-free, they got to own this property and had tax advantages to doing it. And then they were leasing them out. Are you a business or are you a church? Are you worshiping God or are you worshiping the dollar? Because if they're worshiping the dollar, if they're taking the government tax incentives to keep their doors open and investing that money, well, I'm sorry, you're a beneficiary of the status quo. And of course, all the media and political representatives of these guys. If you look at the people that you know and start ticking them off into, do they fall in any of these categories, you will be horrified at how many people out there benefit from the status quo at your expense. It's a tyranny of the nice. Which means, why are we creating these domestic terrorists, potentially? Because that's what the nice people want. They surround us. And if we're going to act effectively, we have to recognize the reality of that. They surround us. But they need us. Because if we're the people who produce value in the country, and if you commit yourself to being one of those people, I'm a guy who produces value in civilization. I elevate culture. If you commit to that, you become one of the people that they need. But we don't need them for anything. We don't need them to take from us. But that's what they exist for. And the great secret is, if everyone commits to, I'm going to add value to civilization, there will no longer be an enemy of liberty, and all these other problems will evaporate. Well, this sounds like Atlas Shrugged, right? Gulch kind of stuff. Well, if you're a big fan of Ayn Rand, you're probably not going to like this next slide because I'm going to talk about where she was wrong.